Hey folks, David Stewart here. Time to take on another educational sacred cow, grades. They've lost their meaning, and therefore they are worthless. Not for the reasons that other people will say, like, oh, they promote inequality, or they hurt self-esteem, or they're not a whole measure of a child, but really because of the way that our institutions have managed grading. They've eliminated their original meaning and turned them into something that just really isn't useful in their current, the current incantation anymore. So let me talk about a couple things, three big areas. First one is the purpose of grading is to certify knowledge and skills in a specific area. That's why we have everything divided up into subjects: reading, writing, math, all of the different subjects. We certify those different subjects for a couple of reasons. The main one is because in future academic pursuits, there's prerequisites. You're building on the previous skills. So you need a certification that says the student has achieved mastery of algebra and they are ready for Algebra 2. They've achieved mastery of calculus and they're ready for Calculus 2. And the grade has to do with their level of mastery. A would be they are fully mastered in it. They did an excellent job and they know all of the skills. And C would be they know the majority of the skills. They know enough skills to be able to perform the necessary tasks in that skill area. And, D is barely passing, really needs remediation. F is failing, complete failure. Right? That's the basic idea here. It's not a whole measure of a child. People who want it to be a whole measure of a child, then you wouldn't divide it up by subjects. Okay, you wouldn't have divided by subjects, and you wouldn't have subjects which progress in their difficulty depth and build on the skills or assume that the student is coming in with skills that have been previously acquired. Not adhering to this has major complications. I've seen several students graduate from public school with straight A's, and because the grades don't certify mastery anymore, they go to college with the wrong set of expectations. They think they have mastered the subject area and they aren't prepared for the rigor of college instruction. So that's the purpose, is to certify knowledge and mastery of skills. Area number 2, teachers have two jobs: to certify those skills, but also to teach them. And therein lies the first conflict of interest that really helps to destroy the grading system. So teachers are heavily disincentivized from failing students in a practical sense, and there's a couple of reasons why. First one is when you fail a student, it creates lots of more work for you as a teacher. It creates more work for you as a teacher because you have to now possibly interact with RTI, response to intervention, which is a mountain of paperwork where you have to document all kinds of interventions that you're doing to remediate the student. You have to spend extra class time remediating students, which sacrifices class time for other students. Remember, you only have 50 minutes or so in a class period, and so limited time means that you're spending more of your resources trying to remediate the failing kid and less trying to help the rest of the mainstream of the class. Or it could also create a huge problem because you have to deal with parents, and parents are upset about their kids failing grades, or they want to blame you. And then if you're failing large numbers of students, you have to deal with the administration. The administration is going to assume you are a bad teacher if you're failing lots of students. And there are narcissists in the teaching profession that will fail huge swaths of their class and never consider themselves a bad teacher, or never think, perhaps I'm not communicating this information correctly. They'll think, oh, the kids weren't prepared for the class, or they're stupid, or something else like that. They don't do any kind of self-reflection. So the number of students that pass or fail, if you're like, I'm a great teacher, you pass all your students and you say, look, principal, I'm such a good teacher, all my students got A's. Now, we don't readily believe that, but teachers tend to, they have an incentive to fudge it over to the passing side, to say, yes, I have lots of passing students, they're very good, and therefore I'm a very good teacher because my students have passed the class, and that's great. So there's a conflict of interest. You have to certify and you also have to teach. And if you were to split those two up and your job was entirely to teach, then you have an objective measure, an objective assessment or test that's directly related to what you're supposed to be teaching that will certify it. Then you have a little bit more division. You have an ability to really see, oh, is the teacher really making that connection there? Are they really actually teaching the knowledge for the class? But because they're the same, you're heavily disincentivized not to fail students. More than that, you can actually get sued. I had a student who wanted to sue me like my first semester teaching at the university level because I gave him a C. not because I even failed him. And according to the syllabus, he was supposed to fail because he didn't turn in the final work. He didn't turn in all the written work. And according to like university policy, you're supposed to fail students who don't turn in the written work. Every class was supposed to have so many words of written assignments. But he was an okay student otherwise in the class, and that's what he got without turning in his work. So I just gave him a C and figured it'd be okay. And when it came back, it's like, we can go by the syllabus, but you're going to get an F because you didn't turn in your work. Eventually, thankfully, it turned out okay, and I think he dropped it because he had like immigrated to the Philippines or something. I don't remember the whole story, but I remember that had a big impact on me, which is like, you mean if you fail a student, you can get sued? There's another big disincentive. It's a huge headache. Anytime you put an F on a student, you're looking at it like, man, this is going to cause me problems. And you have to have a high degree of integrity to actually fail a student when they deserve to be failed, when they don't have the skills and knowledge. So third big area, grades, partly as a result of this incentive, but related to the relationship of the institutions as a whole as well. Grades in the real world are not used to certify mastery and knowledge. There's a couple of things that go with this. So the first one is, of course, teachers have an incentive not to fail students, which means the grade could be inflated. But the other thing is teachers tend to decide their grading system is going to be composed of work which isn't related to knowledge or skill in the subject area. Just as an example, do you have a homework grade? If your homework grade is related to did you do the homework, did you not do the homework, especially, which is what most teachers do. Or even then, is the homework like filling out the questions at the end of the chapter? It's not a test, in other words. Homework is not usually a real assessment unless it's a project like an essay. Obviously, essays can be homework that have real impact. But and I've talked about this with a much longer video, like why homework sucks. But homework is just, if you make your grade 40% homework, the kid does the homework and they fail the tests, which happens a lot. The homework pads their grade. It pushes them up into a passing grade, even though they really don't have the skills or knowledge to pass the class. Because the actual test of what they're doing doesn't show that. This happens in math classes. So in a math class, your assessment, your test is really pretty valid of an assessment of whether you can actually to execute the math for that unit. It really is a really good example of this. And so if you fudge that with homework, if you lessen the impact of the test, you are lowering the quality of the grade. You're making the grade, you're padding the grade basically by letting people make up for their lack of skill and knowledge in the subject area by doing something else that involves conscientiousness, doing homework, being diligent. Classroom participation in English classes, classroom participation in any class, for example, having people lose points because they're tardy. Having people gain points by showing up early, all of these sorts of things. There tends to be a high degree of behavior reinforcement that is involved in grading. And whenever you have behavior reinforcement involved in grading, you're no longer certifying skills and knowledge. The best example I can think of is actually PE, physical education. Those of you who are American and grew up with PE, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to say here, which is that if you look at the grade in PE, you see someone got an A. What the hell does that mean? Does that mean that person's physically fit? No, it doesn't mean that person's physically fit. That's what it needs to mean. You see a grade of A in calculus, that should mean this guy's really good at calculus. If you see an A in PE, this should mean this guy's really athletic. He's really good at sports. And to a great degree, you can control that. But think about an obese kid who gets A's in PE. How did he get an A in PE if he can't even run around the track? The answer is because he dresses out every day and attempts to do what the coach tells him to do, and the coach gives him participation points, and he gets full points for dressing out. That's how you get an A in PE. I've never met a PE teacher in my entire life, either as a student or as a professional educator, who ever graded in any way that made the actual physical fitness of the students have a big impact on their grade. Even when I was in school, this was very controversial. We had physical fitness tests every single semester, and you needed to pass them. But the thing is, you could still get an A in PE and do really badly in them because they weren't that big of a grade. The grade was so heavily padded by dressing out that if you could show up and do 20 pull-ups and 50 push-ups and 100 sit-ups in this amount of time, and you could run the mile in 6 minutes, that wouldn't guarantee you an A if you weren't dressing out every single day. You had to dress out every single day, or you weren't ever getting an A. It wasn't ever happening. So that's just how it worked. And it was still controversial to have even a portion of the grade related to these physical fitness assessments. So if you see a grade in PE in a perfect world, if the concept of the grade meant a certification in skill and knowledge, that would mean that person's athletic, but it's not. So it's just a very good example. The grade certifies something different. It's more of a whole measure of the child, but not even that. What grades really end up being is partially a measure of their skills and mastery, but we don't know what percentage of the grade is that, but more so the student's ability to interact appropriately with the institutions, that is to meet the behavior and other kinds of expectations of the institution itself. Do you show up on time? Do you put on your gym clothes? Do you turn in your homework? Do you participate in class discussions? Are you a good kid? So having that 4.0 means you're a good kid. You were nice at school. You did what the school wanted you to do. And I can tell you in my experience, the smartest kids almost never had straight A's. Occasionally, you had a kid that was like really high IQ that had straight A's, but most of the really high IQ kids just weren't that interested in doing all of the stuff the institution wanted to do. The homework was dumb. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to, they ditched class. They did stuff like that because school was boring and stupid. They didn't care about it. So most of the really high IQ kids who got like 1,400 plus on their SATs, and now I think there's a third part, so it'd be like 2,100 plus or something. Anyway, the kids who got 95th percentile plus on their SAT scores, they all had middling grades. That's just how it was. There wasn't a correlation with grades. So the grades really were a certification of how they managed themselves with the institution. So that's really what I wanted to say about this. The reason grades are stupid now is not because the concept is bad. The concept is great. The problem is that our institutions are set up in a way that really minimizes the impact of what grades are supposed to be. It's turned grades from a general measure, like kids need a 4.0 to get into college, so you really can't fail them in PE just because they're unable to do anything physically. You have to give them an opportunity to get at least a B in PE so they can go on to the university system, which is what they need. We're not willing to look at separate subjects as certifications. We look at the GPA, and that's the whole measure of the child. And so we end up with a problem here, which is that grades don't mean what they're supposed to mean. So let me know what you think down below about this conclusion and my thoughts about it. What do you think about grades? Do you think that they're like some tool of oppression, or do you think that they're like what I think is because of the way that we execute them, they don't really have meaning. They don't have as much meaning as we really wish that they had. So let me know, and I'll see you guys next time.